So this is just the third episode of this channel. Um, Started it just a couple of days ago. Um, and the title is A Perfect Venn Diagram. The idea being that maybe we need to start thinking about what a perfect Venn diagram would look like, what the circles that are blended into that would be, the various facts, beliefs, opinions, philosophies, and most importantly, I believe, the character that would all blend together to form something like a perfect Venn diagram that would blend the truths on both sides of the aisle in a way that we would have something to move forward towards. And the first episode I called a Democrat agreeing with Charlie Kirk. I'm essentially a Democrat. Voted Democratic my entire life, was raised in a Democratic family. And in that episode, what I wanted to do was, definitely disagree with Charlie Kirk because I disagreed with, a lot of what he said, and certainly disagreed with his character. But I also wanted to take it a step further and say, okay, there are certain things, certain hard truths that Charlie Kirk is right on, that the right is right on, that the left will have to come to terms with eventually. And I gave examples. One of the examples that I gave is that there's an established scientific finding over literally the last 100 years that there's a significant difference in IQ among races. And if you understand how important IQ is to the individual, for instance, it's better to be born in the upper 5% of IQ than it is to be born in the upper 5% of income. Having an elite IQ is a better predictor of life success than being born into a family with elite income. And so if that's true of the individual, then that's going to be true of the group. But of course, it's a very, very difficult subject. Something else that I talked about in that episode was the problem of Islam. I hear a lot about Islamophobia on many of the left-leaning podcasts that I listen to, and Charlie Kirk says places that Islam is the sword with which the left is cutting its own throat, or which the West is cutting its own throat. And I think that that's true, especially in Europe, where the immigrants that they have are many of them Muslim and carry their militant Islamic beliefs with them. And this causes real problems for an open Western liberal society. I mean, just think of what happened when the Islamists entered Charlie Hebdo. If you remember that, it was Charlie Hebdo was a satirical French newspaper that had poked fun at Islam, had done things that were what's the word I'm looking for? Made fun of the prophet, that sort of thing. And gunmen stormed Charlie Hebdo and killed dozens of people. And so these are just examples of some hardcore truths on that exist that on the left aren't brought into the left's Venn diagram. The left is loath to accept that there might be any differences in intelligence among the races, generally speaking. That's not going to be then true of individuals. There will be, outstanding individuals within that group, but generally speaking. And the left talks about Islamophobia, but almost never talks about why people are phobic of Islam. For instance, you've never heard of Buddha, Buddhist phobia, Hindu phobia, you know, um, Eventually, he was changed after many years, but Apu, for all of the 90s and 2000s, was a caricature of a Hindu, and nobody got killed over it. But the creators of South Park put Allah in a, you know, in the episode that they did this, they put him in a mascot outfit, and that got a fatwa put on their head. So this is, some, solid examples of what I'm trying to do here, which is to say we have to start blending these things, right? We don't want to be against people for their religion, but we also have to realize when that religion crosses a line and they're against us because of that religion. And we don't want to just assume that just because somebody's black that they can't be a Supreme Court justice like Ketanji Brown Jackson. I thought Charlie Kirk was very offensive in his comments around Ketanji Brown Jackson, Michelle Obama, and there was one other woman he mentioned in that comment not having the brain processing power that completely misses the point, which is just because there's a finding of differences in IQ among races doesn't mean within that race you won't find individuals with very high IQs. And that's why I say that character is, for me, the most important wheel, the most important circle in that perfect Venn diagram. Because, yes, we have to include these facts that are difficult to accept, but we also have to have the character to use those facts correctly, to use them humanely, to use them with love. And so, just within the last 48 hours, Ezra Klein had Ta-Nehisi Coates on his podcast. And I was listening to that the other day while I was in the car, and then I re-listened to it today. And look, I'm one of the least technically proficient YouTubers you will find. And so I can't just go in and do one of these reaction videos with all this editing. I'm not an editor, I don't have an editor, and I don't have a staff. But I do want to share my screen and just share one clip from the conversation that Ezra Klein had with Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I guess perhaps a little background is needed. In the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder, Ezra Klein said some generous things about Charlie Kirk. He said he practiced politics the right way. He went out and engaged people on college campuses and had debates. Whether he did that from a place of good faith or whether he was engaging in gotcha culture, perhaps is second to the fact that at least he was engaging with, he was using free speech. He wasn't using violence. And then there was blowback, and there's been a lot of blowback on Ezra Klein. He's probably lost a lot of subscribers and listeners over that. It's certainly been all over the comments section. And then Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an article pushing back on that. And then Ezra Klein and their friends brought him into the studio recently, and they sat down and had an hour-long conversation to just sort of go over, what the disagreements were about. And so, before I play that clip, I want to say I grew up with Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates grew up in the apartment building across the street from my house. We used to ride big wheels together. I had a fort in my backyard that my dad had built. We went into the basement and made wooden shields and swords, and we got all the neighborhood kids together, and we, had battles, and we went to grade school together. And Ezra, he grew up on the other side of town, but we all went to the same magnet school for middle school. It was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Experimental Laboratory School. That's a mouthful. In high school, Ezra Klein was, the editor of the yearbook. He was the editor of the school newspaper. Ta-Nehisi Coates was a member of the United Brothers and Sisters, UBS. It was an organic student coalition that they put together, and they published their own newspaper. Now, Of course, I didn't grow up with them, but what I'm saying is I grew up with Ta-Nehisi Coates's and Ezra Klein's. That was the city that I grew up in, a place called Evanston, Illinois, which is the first suburb north of Chicago along the lake. It was a very integrated community, a very beautiful place to grow up, and just a rich environment, culturally, racially, great educational system. And so, watching them and listening to them talk, I recognize them. All right, we're similar ages roughly. And what I also want to say is that they're good people. Like, I want to say I recognize when I see good people. I recognize when I listen to good people, the words they use, their cadence, their thoughtfulness. And I think that's really important. You'll see I'll show a couple of left-leaning podcasts that are doing the whole gotcha thing on Ezra Klein right now. But Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates are the kind of people that I would love to call neighbors and I would love to call friends. And I think that the way that they hold this conversation exemplifies that. I mean, like you can feel it, you can hear it. And I guess, I mean, really, I mean, no, this would, lose me subscribers. I'm probably doomed to having a very small audience because, quite frankly, the idea of a perfect Venn diagram is the antithesis of the algorithm. What the algorithm wants you to do is to focus on a circle within that Venn diagram, right? And my first episode, I also called out that I believe that trans is false. There's been a 50-fold increase in the number of people claiming trans in the last 15 years. And in the 90s and the 2000s, I was everywhere that trans would have been if it was a thing like it is now. And it just wasn't. I mean, I was in hardcore gay clubs. I was in, very fringe artistic circles. I had gay friends and I worked in the restaurant business, and close to half of the people that I worked with were gay. And it was just simply on nobody's lips. Sorry, losing my train of thought a little bit. But I'm bringing this all to this conversation because, oh, I'm sorry, the algorithm. What the algorithm would want me to do is to take my trans skepticism and make an entire channel around it. Or the algorithm would want me to take this difficult truth about the differences in racial IQ, and that's all I do. Or trans would want, or trans, excuse me, or the algorithm would want me to just focus on what the Democratic Party could do to get elected in the next cycle. And if I stuck with any one of those things, I would see much better numbers in terms of, views, distribution, and that whole thing. But that's, so against what I think needs to be done, which is we need to find a way to the correct way to blend these things. And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to model here. So, I'm going to say things that are going to lose me more subscribers probably than I'll gain. And one of those things is that when I watch right leaning media, what I see is a lack of good people. The goodness that I see on display when Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ezra Klein are working out their differences, I just rarely see on the right. And the further right I go, it just disappears altogether. And so if you're on the right and you're just curious how people on the left see you, we just wonder, we just, shake our heads in disbelief when we tune into Fox just to see what's going on the other side. It's like, how can't you see how empty all these people are, how vacuous all these people are? How can you look at a guy like Trump and think that you could trust him for a second with your life? And that's what you have to do if he's your president. How can you look at his press secretary? How can you look at his cabinet? How can you look at Steve Bannon? How can you look at, oh, who's the InfoWars guys? You know, I, when you look at these guys, I don't see any goodness on display. I don't see any heart. And so, what I want to point out here is just that as a basic fact, whether I agree or disagree with Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates on everything, these are good people. And it's got to start. I mean, the heart of that perfect Venn diagram has to be good people. It has to be a belief in goodness and decency and humanity. Otherwise, there's just no point. We're just barbarians. That's all. So, gonna share my screen here and just play a little clip. And I thought it was relevant to what I'm trying to do on this channel because, you know, and even the section of the video is titled, what did we get wrong? Like, why did we lose? Why do we keep losing? And then they mention all of the things that I mentioned in the first episode, which is trans rights, which is Islamophobia, among other things. And they're asking, especially Ezra keeps asking, why did we lose? And he doesn't then turn around and say, where are the false planks in our platform? What if trans isn't what it presents itself to be? Right? What if it's a mind virus? What if it's a cult? What if it's just simple narcissism? People that can identify a certain way and all of a sudden they get all this power. And what if there really are problems with Islam, right? Just because they find themselves under the democratic tent because we're the only ones that will let them in. Islam as is, per se, is far more to the right than even Charlie Kirk and Donald Trump. When you talk about women's rights, when you talk about gay rights, and for sure when you talk about trans rights. So if they're looking for the reason why we keep losing on the left, I would offer that they have to get very specific. They have to go one by one, and we have to start, thumping these planks in the platform and seeing, are they really real or do they actually ring hollow? Is there something there that we're missing? And that's what I'm trying to do here. So again, excuse me, most technically non-proficient YouTuber, just doing a little Zoom here. But this is going to be the conversation between Ezra and Ta-Nehisi. But I wanted to show you just how it's being picked up by, other influencers. Here's Destiny, and I actually really like Destiny. I'm glad a guy like him exists because he's got a very swift mind and he makes really good points. But it's MAGA has to like us, and Ezra Klein still doesn't get it. And you got Hassan Piker, whom I do not like. And, it's the wrong way about Ezra Klein and his comments on Charlie Kirk. And, he's got the big O face, like, oh, yeah, oh. And he says, Ta-Nehisi Coates here obliterates all capitals Ezra Klein on Kirk, right? This is that gotcha, culture that we're living in. And also, we have this circular firing squad on the left. And then finally, you've got Sam Sater on the majority report, and his, at least he doesn't do the all caps, Ezra Klein ripped to shreds by his own audience. And yeah, I want to know another reason why we're losing. There are more Democrats in this country than there are Republicans. But, right, I mean, literally, there's only about 35% of the country that are hardcore MAGA. But what do the Republicans always do? They fall in line. There's an old joke. Republicans fall in line, Democrats fall in love. And what they do when they fall in line is they create a phalanx, right? If you ever saw Troy back in the day with Brad Pitt, when Greeks, they stormed the beach, they lock their shields together, and so they're almost like a tank, right? They're protected on all sides, and they're even protected above their heads. And so in battle, Republicans form a phalanx, and then all us Democrats who are much more numerous, are like, the naked barbarians. The Gauls used to go into war against the Romans naked, and didn't work out for us in the last election. So I just want to play this short clip here, but you know, it just sort of lays it all out, and I'll give my thoughts about it on the other side.
I think we began to pull back. I really do.
But maybe it would help if you define the
I will define the we,
like,
right? Because I actually
help.
think this is a very hard thing about talking about political parties,
right,
because they're diffuse,
right?
It's a lot of people doing a lot of things all at once. But I think of the huge backlash to Bernie Sanders for going on Joe Rogan's show because Rogan was transphobic, right? Such a big backlash that when I defended him, I became myself a Twitter trending topic.
Right.
To Elizabeth Warren for going on Bill Maher's show. Bill Maher's Islamophobic. Right. There were protests at Netflix when they brought on Dave Chappelle. Right. I think there was a politics of content moderation that took hold that was more about enforcing boundaries of what, were and were not ideas we should be engaged with, than about engaging with them, again, even if opportunistically. And when I go back to something I was saying to you a minute ago, I am in a process right now of thinking we failed, right? We lost. The loss is having terrible consequences.
Okay. And so that basically puts it in a nutshell. Because of transphobia, because of Islamophobia, why do we keep losing? And it's had terrible consequences. But they then don't seem to have the introspection to go about and really meaningfully begin looking for the reasons why we lost. I envy both of them in their careers. There was a time when I was in college that I was into op-ed writing. I used to write for the little paper in the little liberal arts school that I went to, and I got dissuaded from doing that. And 30 years later, I have no career along those lines. I've got a little microphone and I plug it into the internet and I give my thoughts. But I guess an advantage that I have is more freedom than they have to call truth, truth. To get to the point where Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ezra Klein both are, you have to select for certain opinions, and you have to select for a certain crowd and a certain audience, and you have to, it's always running in the background of your mind, right? What's the appropriate thing to say more than what's the true thing to say? And so they said right there, and Ezra Klein got huge, pushback for, supporting Bernie Sanders going on Joe Rogan's podcast because Joe Rogan is transphobic. Well, what if, just as a thought experiment, Joe Rogan isn't transphobic? What if he sees the phenomenon for what it really is, and everybody on the left is wrong on that? And then furthermore, can't you see this insidious power if trans isn't what it presents itself to be? Just doing the thought experiment. The insidious power that they then have to go canceling people, to cancel somebody like Bernie Sanders. I mean, who else do you have that's, even viable, if you're that far on the left? And so it's both an example of, okay, what if trans is false, but also don't you see it's false and they're the very people that are weighing you down because they'll attack, right? And that's part of what's on offer by becoming a trans person, is that it gives you this power now to make people wrong, to put them, outside of the moral majority, to cast them out, right? That's an immense power socially that most people don't have. But you become trans and now somebody calls you by your old name, they're dead naming you. If they, to them, you're still a man no matter what surgery you've had, and they call you a man. Now you are misgendering them, And that misgendering carries all of the stigma. It carries all of the bite of calling somebody a racist, of saying that they use the N word, right? This is where, I want to jump into the conversation and say, don't you see, guys? Right there, you're wondering why we keep losing. And you're failing to see that perhaps we're wrong on trans. And then Elizabeth Warren goes on Bill Maher's show and she gets in trouble because people say that Bill Maher's Islamophobic. Well, have you ever stopped to consider why people might be Islamophobic? Right? It's kind of like, being, having a fear of heights. There's a reason why people have a fear of heights. People are afraid of dogs. There's a reason why people are afraid of dogs. People are afraid of spiders. There's a reason why people are afraid of spiders. Do this thought experiment. How uncomfortable would you be telling a joke about the Buddhist religion? How comfortable would you be telling a joke about the Hindu religion? How often do you hear people exclaim, Jesus Christ? Ta-Nehisi Coates does it in this episode. How many sacrilegious images of Christ and the cross do you see on a regular basis? You see it so much you don't even see it anymore. You don't know any good Muslim jokes. You don't know any jokes about the prophet because there's somebody not too far away from you with a gun that will use it if you do. Right? And so these are two examples on the left of wheels of circles within the Venn diagram that they're getting wrong. And then they want to ask, okay, we lost the election. It's had horrible consequences. This had disastrous consequences. We are in the midst of an autocracy. We have masked men on the streets that are abducting people and putting them in psychological torture chambers. These ICE facilities are atrocious. People are put in, super cooled chambers under a thin metal blanket with harsh LED lights that never turn off. They don't see the light of day. 14 people have died in ICE custody just since the start of the year. And some of them are dying from heart attacks because the stress of the detention is too great, right? We sent all these hundreds of Venezuelans to this torture prison in El Salvador. Even if they were members of a gang, that's not sufficient to torture somebody. And we have at least two solid examples, Kilmar Abrego and Andre, who, I'm sorry, just one of the gayest men you'll ever meet, a hairdresser. There's no way that the guy is a danger to anybody. And he was subjected to severe psychological torture. And it's very important that we get these things right. And I know a shocking number of people being, pretty liberal guy and living in Southern California. I know several people who voted for Trump, and a lot of it had to do with the trans. You take trans and just the sort of ick factor of it, and then you say they're doing this to kids. That shuts it off for people. It's over. They'll take January 6th. They'll take the corruption. They'll take the sex scandals. You just give them that much. And if trans were true, right, if we were to compare, because it rides right on the heels of the acceptance of gays, right? It comes right on the heels of the acceptance of gay marriage. Now, I believe that's true. I believe that, gay is a real thing, for lack of a better term, meaning when we look back in history, we can see, gay people in literature and history. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and then in the 90s, it started to become more acceptable. You get Will and Grace on TV, that sort of thing. And then I could look back in time and say, oh, that person is gay and that person is gay. And, people come out to you, oh, I'm gay. And you see this sort of random distribution, this organic quality to it. And that, to me, is what actually won the day finally, is when people began to say, okay, this is really a thing. If trans is a thing like homosexuality is a thing, then yes, supporting trans is the right thing to do. But I don't believe that it is. You get this 50-fold increase in the last 15 years, right? We went from 1 in 10,000 people being gay, I'm sorry, being trans, to 1 in 200 people in the last 15 years. And that's a 50-fold increase. Where did that all come from? And then it clusters around certain friends groups, it clusters around certain schools. Like, I guarantee you, if you and your parents shop at Trader Joe's, there's some exponential increase in your chances of identifying as trans than if you and your parents shop at Hy-Vee, which was a local grocery chain when I went to school in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. You get what I'm saying? There were gay people at Hy-Vee in the early 90s when I was in school that may or may not have felt comfortable being gay, but there were no trans people at Hy-Vee. Now I walk into a Trader Joe's and I got to mind my pronouns, right? And then when it comes to Islam, there's a real reason for people to feel afraid. I'm a big supporter of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And it's shocking to me how wrong so many people are on this subject and how much people have gotten numb to it and moved on. But one of the things comparing, the Ukraine war to the situation in Gaza is, for me, how much more clear cut it is, how obvious a battle between good and evil it is. And I understand concerns for the Gazans, and I'll accept that right now a genocide is taking place and that needs to stop. But the reason for the destruction in Gaza has everything to do with October 7th and the atrocities that happened there. And to skip over that and to pretend that that's not the case just is running afoul of what I'm trying to show here, which is we have to blend. We have to, have some sort of verticality to our thinking. So I'll finish with this. Another thing that both Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ezra Klein miss is that there's a really good chance that the Democrats didn't lose the 2024 election. One of the things they're missing is they're vastly underestimating what they're up against with MAGA, with the Heritage Foundation, with Republicans and the Republican-Russian nexus. Now, it's too much to go into right now, but one, there are serious statistical anomalies that suggest that there was vote shifting in the election. You can, look for it other places on YouTube, but there's a group now that studies elections. They're statisticians. They're using the same tools that are used to verify elections in, say, third world countries. And you're looking for certain statistical data points that show you that there are, something's up. One of those data points is that in the swing states, there's this huge increase in people who voted locally for Democrats, but voted for Trump for president. Right? Like, there are always outliers. There's always somebody who's going to do something like that. But it's like 5x what it should be. And to look at a guy like Donald Trump, and this is where character is important, to say that Donald Trump wouldn't cheat if he knew he could get away with it just is absurd. Of course he would cheat. He just got caught cheating in golf in Scotland as president of the United States. That would end anybody else's political career, as late as 10, 15 years ago. We know he's a cheater. He lied about the 2020 election. He tried to steal the 2020 election. We all heard the conversation with the Secretary of State of Georgia where he's asking him to find 10,000 some votes. And then he sent an angry mob to the Capitol. So there's a real good chance that the election was just straight up stolen in 2024. Furthermore, there is this Russian Republican nexus, and this is not conspiracy speak. This is right out for everybody to see. Right now, the Heritage Foundation, which is the top conservative think tank and has been for 40, 50 years, is in Budapest, Hungary, working in cooperation with the Danube Institute. You can go look it up online. They've signed a cooperation agreement. The Danube Institute is a think tank run by Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban is an autocrat. He is Putin's man in the EU. And you've got thousands of Republicans, thousands of hundreds, however big the Heritage Foundation, they're holding workshops, symposiums, speeches in Budapest, where the Russian intelligence services are sure to be. It's crawling with Russian agents. And so they're having, backroom conversations at length, ad nauseum. And we're actually seeing the autocratic playbook being played out here in America right now. They're trying to do what Viktor Orban did in Hungary here in America. And so I'm just seeing Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates, for all their goodness and good intention and for all their intelligence, just whiffing on these things, right? Reassess trans. Is it really what it presents itself as being? Where was it 20 years ago? Islamophobia. Are you sure that people have no reason to be skeptical of Islam? And if Muslims were given the power, what do you think they would do with it? If the Israelis were just to give that back all the land, how do you think that the new land of Palestine would turn out? Would it be a good place? Would it be somewhere that you would want to live? Or would it swiftly turn into Syria? Right? And then when you're up against an evil empire, as we are with Donald Trump in the White House, you can't underestimate the level that they will go to cheat and steal to hold on to power. All right. So that wasn't as succinct and concise as possible, but it's, what I've got. Thanks for watching.